What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Healthspan Academy. I'm your host, Craig Shearhart, and joining me today is my special guest, Dr. Dan Vitale, who is on for the second time. And the scope of today's show is really about running through everything that we put into the book and the kind of the tangible things we can take home. So Dan was originally my chiropractor. We met almost 10 years ago, I guess now, and then became a member at my gym. So we've just kind of been collaborating over the years. And he introduced me to the concept of biohacking originally when I had no idea what that was. And we kind of like both rabbit holed down this, and we decided it was important enough to us in our lives to sort of extend our lives and extend the quality of our lives and kind of our health span. So we decided to collaborate and write this book together. So Dan, it's great to have you back, man.
Thanks for having me on, Craig.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to start, with kind of the rationale. So I mean, my main rationale for the book was putting something together that I wish I would have had, 10 years ago, just kind of everything laid out in terms of what are all the variables, the lifestyle pieces that you can really optimize in order to optimize your health and function and live as well as possible for as long as possible. What were your kind of main ticket points that you were motivated by writing this?
Yeah, well, early on in my practicing, I was doing some webinars and lectures, and I was blogging as well. So I was getting some thoughts across and I was communicating that with patients. And then I thought as well, it would be great to have a little handbook where I can get some of those thoughts and we can collaborate together. I know you dig into the science as well. So it's good that both of us covered a lot of that. And yeah, it's nice to have something that I can pass along or gift if I'd like and give all that concise information in one-stop shop.
For sure. And I think it was good because you had kind of the clinical background. I had like a bit of more biomechanics and kind of academic stuff. So I think it kind of worked out to being a good product. I'm pretty happy with how it's turned out. So essentially we just basically combined our classic kind of education, stuff we picked up in school that had applied and made real life change for us. And then some of our experience, myself with coaching and Dan with clinical stuff. And then some of the biohacking stuff that I've dabbled with and you've gotten into. So that was kind of the methodology and framework we kind of used to put this together. And we broke this up into different chapters. So the first chapter we focused on mobility, and that's something that I've struggled with really since like adolescence. I've just had constant injuries, multiple knee dislocations, shoulder dislocations, neck surgeries, knee surgeries, you name it. I probably had some form of that injury, mostly from sports. And I think part of it was just not really knowing how to take care of my body through those years. So I did tons of physio and that kind of stuff to sort of resolve this stuff. So the mobility chapter is like my Frankenstein's monster of all this like history of prehab, rehab stuff I'd done, some of the mobility pieces I'd tried myself over the years. And some of this, and I tried literally everything. So, I was big into Kelly Starrett, and he was a huge game changer for me. I actually had him on the show earlier this year, which was really cool for me because he was a big mentor for myself. So I did his stuff for a year straight. And then that was probably when I noticed that the biggest change. And I did yoga for a year and started getting some benefits from that, but really wasn't quite where I wanted to be. And then I kind of, really got more involved with the active piece, the FRC stuff from Andrea Spina, which has been game changing. And then, so basically put all of this together. It's just like a mix match of the stuff that I found most useful and then put it into a method and ended up being what we call a 5-pillar method of mobility. And the reason, I don't think it's necessarily ideal for everybody, but if somebody that's like a brick wall in terms of getting their mobility and they're just like, feel like they're not getting ahead, like this is, I think the most rigorous thing at least that I've found that exists. So, and I think it comes down to where you struggle with mobility. So we talk about the 5 pillars, which are release, open, lengthen, align, and activate. And these are all different factors that can contribute to your mobility restrictions. So the first question we ask is, what are the main tissues around the joint that can be in a trigger point situation or just tight general and need some form of release. So it might be a lacrosse ball work, might be some kind of like percussion to get those tissues relaxed, might be a full massage, even that kind of fits into the whole spectrum of it too, to get those tissues more pliable and ready for movement to improve that joint function. And then the next piece is then open. So joint compression and kind of counteracting the effects of gravity, especially on load bearing joints like the ankle, knee and hip and low back, just opening up that joint so there's more room to move. And then the third pillar is lengthen. And this is kind of where it differentiates, because I think a lot of people, when they think I'm stiff, the first thing is I need to stretch more. And stretching can be helpful, but if one of those first pillars is an issue, those are like prereqs in order to get the most out of your stretching. So stretching's great and yoga is great, and it works. That might be all you need depending on what your mobility restrictions are. For me, it wasn't enough. I needed to kind of go a little deeper, and a lot of my clients have kind of found something similar. So basically it's conventional stretching. We kind of taper in some active stretching in that, but a lot of it's just passive in that kind of that third pillar. And the fourth pillar, this is why it's really great when interacting with yourself, Dan, because alignment is like something you don't want to go too deep in individually or just as a coach. And it's really best if you've got something misaligned where you're working with a clinician to get things back in kind of normal alignment. Because if that joint's not moving in the right direction, you're also limited in your mobility. And that kind of ends up being some form of dysfunction and can lead to injuries as well. And the last piece is activate. And this is a generalized term for creating stability around the end range of the joints. So what happens when we do a lot of passive work, you're increasing the passive range of motion, but you're not improving the stability and strength of those positions. And you can imagine if you've all of a sudden opened up your shoulders to this new range of motion and you've never loaded those joints in those positions, you're unstable and susceptible to injuries. And that's what we see a lot of people, either gymnastics or yoga backgrounds, where they've got all this crazy range of motion in the shoulder, but they don't have the stability to kind of support those positions. So that's kind of the comprehensive look at what the system looks like as a whole. And then we just kind of tinkered. We just kind of like searched through a lot of our mentors and developed like specific routines. So the chapter kind of outlines those 5 pillars in a practical means where you can kind of start. And there's lots of exercise and sample routines for mobility that we've done. We actually put together some videos that are free routines that are available there. And it's like, I mean, obviously biased because I developed this, but this is the best mobility I've had in my life. I've just started PRing my Olympic lifts for the first time in 4 years. It's always been a mobility restriction for me. It's never been a strength or technique. I've kind of like got that stuff, but the technique kind of changes your mobility. So it's just, I'm finally starting to see results, and it's taken me a long time, but it was really the system and trusting the system. And then we've kind of extended that. People from my gym have followed it and had similar results. And I know Dan's done some of it as well. And he contributed to the chapter as well. So that's kind of what that chapter was all about for me. Dan, do you have anything to add about that mobility piece?
Yeah, just I think we followed on a similar journey. I was plagued with being a small hockey player. I was plagued with lots and lots of injuries. So I saw a lot of different therapists and chiropractors and such, lots and lots of people. But what I did realize later in life is that this mobility piece was overlooked over the years. Mm-hmm. Kelly Starr was also a mentor of mine, as well with patients. And then probably not until I got into some of the mobility, I worked one-on-one for about 2 years, at least once a week, with one of the coaches actually at the gym where we'd worked before. And we would do some of the FRC work, and then decided that, this is pretty, and Andrea was a year ahead of me in school as well. So Spina. So I thought this would be a pretty good thing to add to my artillery in the office. So now I prescribe it, and I use the morning routine, which is essentially going through those controlled articular rotation of the car with the full body. And then I have some specific pails and rails, which is loading that joint in, what we would think is your weakest range. So a lot of people gain this new flexibility, but they don't strengthen it. And that's the essence of the mobility, is being strong in that end range, so that you're usually when you get hurt, it's usually when you're in that weak position. Yeah. So that's the important. And I think putting all the pieces together that we laid out in the book were game changers for me and many athletes, especially as we're getting older. We're big on this health span discussion where we want to be as healthy for as long as possible. And I want to continue to do the lifting that I do now, into my 90s and 100s, so this concept is one that we both, we both follow closely, and it seems to work. And a lot of the people we work with agree as well.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's well said. And I think like it's kind of one of those things that gets put aside. A lot of people, it's just not the sexy stuff in fitness, right? And you don't want to do a lot of stretching, mobility work, but it is really relaxing when you get into the routine, and it's hugely beneficial. And if you're in it for the long haul, your joints have to be near the top of your priority, because your cardio is not going to be there. Your strength isn't going to be there if your joints aren't functioning as well as they can.
I would agree.
So I love that. The next chapter we talked about was cardio. And this is like, we looked at this from a few different perspectives. We wanted something that you could take away. I think that cardio is sort of the least resistance piece in fitness. So I think a lot of people have at least done some form of cardio, whether it's lasted or whether people have gotten bored. So our take in that chapter was, let's try to lay this out so you can get the right mix of cardio in the right dose in a way that's sustainable. And it's going to keep your heart and your cardiovascular system and your lymphatic system, all that stuff healthy for as long as possible. And actually Dan wrote most of this chapter. So I'm going to let you kind of talk about the details, how you wrote that, what the lens was, and some of the data you came up with for that.
Well, I think I came full circle and I've come around again with cardio, doing long distance triathlons and runs, marathons, and I've done a couple Ironmans and half Ironmans. So this concept of chronic cardio kept coming up, and a lot of endurance athletes were having some cardiovascular issues, some health issues. And I kept seeing in the literature and seeing just anecdotally people mention this. So it was of concern, and I actually didn't feel my best when I was training, especially towards the end of the training. I felt really beat up and, neurologically and fatigued, and I was not, motivation. And so, you got to scratch an itch. So if you have your big climb or your big run that you want to check the box, I think it's great. But I think that volume at that level, and that I think a lot of people, when they look at working out, they just hop on a cardio equipment and they just do their 20, 30, 40 minutes, or you're trying to squeeze in something. So we always work in this concept of 5 zones. So there's zone 1, which is, just going through your day and walking, and it's very relaxed. Zone 2 would be essentially the cutoff for zone 2 is when you have to transition, easily to understand, is from nose breathing to mouth breathing, where you feel like you just can't get enough air in. And then zone 3 and 4 are in between. And then zone 5 essentially is pushing as hard as you can.
Yeah. Those are your 1 RMs of cardio.
So the simple is, most of us in this chronic cardio environment are working kind of as hard as we can, but not quite hard enough. So it's, and that's where we're working that zone 3 and 4. And some people call these junk miles. Yeah. And this is where some of the cardiovascular issues can occur, and some neurological issues can occur from essentially scarring of the heart from working too hard for too long. So the essence, and what I've learned, and this is one of the big ahas for me, is coming back to zone 2 training, because this is where we do the best amount of fat burning. We create this concept of cardio, of metabolic flexibility, where we can burn fat, burn carbohydrates. You have a lot of flexibility in what you're burning. Yeah. And then doing some periodic, not a lot, but sprint intervals like a zone 5. And this is like your 90 to 100%. And most people never work at that edge, and most people don't work slow enough where they feel like they're not working hard enough. So that was a game changer for me, and adding a lot more of that, and being okay with working at a lower resistance for maybe a little bit longer. And working it into your life is probably the key. So doing those long hikes and walks, and watching your heart rate's important. So if you have something, lots of wearables are quite popular these days, whether it's a ring or a watch, and you can kind of track that, and most of them tell you what zone you're in. So so you can have a good look at that. So that's kind of the biggest idea. I still personally will do zone 3 between 1 and 3 hours. Sorry, zone 2 between 1 and 3 hours a week, and I'll do like a long slow run where I try to nasal breathe only, probably once a week. And then I have 5 kids, so a lot of our activities are related with walking. I'm a big evolutionary kind of lens person. So, gathering our groceries, if you will, we go and walk everywhere, jog or bike to go get stuff. So that's part of our routine in the week, and that easily captures some of that time. Yeah.
I love that. So I think like heart rate measurement's important, because I think like an oversimplification is you have like, your sprint system, your glycolytic system, and your aerobic. But we know there's like actually hundreds of different variations. So keeping them constantly varied, I think, is where most people are missing. People tend to fall into their regular routines. So we some of the sample programs, we actually pushed a walk, right? Which, I think walking's starting to become more mainstream. I think it was like almost like, at least in the fitness world, it was like kind of almost frowned upon for a while, but like there's definitely value in it, right? That like your heart needs to develop across all those time domains in order to stay as functional as possible, to keep you active and sort of adaptable for as long as possible. And you talk about chronic cardio, and this is something I want to kind of double down on a little bit, because it is, I think the general population is pretty safe from it, but people that, because fitness is addictive, and especially in the endurance world and the volume is so high, it's easy to kind of fall into that trap of where more is more and better, more is better. And where it's really about getting the right dosage. How do you talk people through that? What are the warning signs that they need to start to be aware of when we start talking about chronic cardio?
So morning heart rate, if you have a wearable, that morning heart rate elevation, if you're tracking your heart rate variability, which is something that we often talk about as well, is some stress markers. And then, some weight loss resistance actually does occur, some fatigue, loss of motivation. That's like your cortisol levels and your stress hormones are starting to get a little bit affected as well. And then I also talk about opportunity costs. So I have these similar to what we described in the book, where I say, if you're spending all this time doing all this cardio, that means that you're not spending time. What is the risk of not doing this? So even with the strength and CrossFit that I do, often people describe the risk of doing CrossFit, but I'm like, what's the risk of not doing CrossFit? So there's definitely a risk of doing all that work in endurance, but then lacking the strength and the mobility, and becoming significantly fragile in the later years, not having the ability to, your fall prevention program, that's huge risk factors. So again, I kind of walk people through the important steps and factors of what they should be looking at in their entire program. And I think the book lays that out nicely as well.
Yeah, I agree. So the next chapter we got into was functional strength. And this is not just pure load application. We tried to touch on a little bit of power as well, and speed, because these are things that tend to slow down as we age as well. And they're kind of underlooked. So moving things at different rates and that kind of stuff. And essentially, strength, I think, is a little bit under the radar for a lot of people, but it's wild when you start, when I actually did the research, and I always have been biased. I've always liked lifting more than I do cardio. But even cardiovascular health, in a huge meta-analysis, strength and resistance training was higher correlated to better cardiovascular health than actual cardio training itself. And that actually blew my mind when I read that article, which is really cool. And it's also linked to cognitive improvement, even more so than cardio. So I think if you're going to choose one, strength almost seems like the more versatile piece to add. And obviously we talk about those different zones and all those are important, but I think it's an underrated piece of the fitness puzzle. And I think rarely do you have people that are doing the right amount of strength and power work mixed in with their cardio stuff, unless they are formed in some version of the CrossFit model. And then there's also the muscle mass, right? The whole concept behind strength training from a longevity lens is the building enough muscle reserve so you're less affected when you start to lose it in old age, because at some point you are going to reverse and you're just going to start to atrophy as you get older. You'll start to lose a bit of bone density, but the stronger those things are early in life, the less affected you're going to be in kind of your retirement years. So that's kind of the lens we had when we went into writing this chapter. So we kind of talked about some of the principles from powerlifting and bodybuilding and gymnastics, and laid that out in sort of a choose your dosage level of strength training. And it's been a game changer. I think it's opened a lot of people's eyes, and it's just empowering. I think it's also creates a bit of a shift from the aesthetic component and those motivations in lifting to your performance in terms of how much you're lifting. And that's those are my favorite clientele kind of stories, when they're like, yeah, I came because I wanted to look great in my bikini, and I stayed because I wanted to back squat 200 pounds. Right. And it's just that switch. So that's kind of the stuff we started to lay out. So what are the movements? What are the foundations of form? How do we maintain neutral spine, or at least a healthy position of the spine when we do these movements? So we went through some of that stuff. And it's when you start to nail this down, for me personally, that's when your energy and day-to-day function is most noticeable in terms of difference. You just feel, I don't know, your posture is better. Just life seems to be easier when you're more functionally strong. So that's kind of what we started with in terms of writing that chapter. Dan, maybe you can talk through some of your take home points on the strength piece.
Yeah, I think the strength, and again, looking at it from this lens of where you want to be in when you're 90 or 100, again, kind of this backcasting is kind of reverse engineering that process. So you think of what functionally you'd like to be able to achieve at that point.
Yeah.
Not just, I often talk about not surviving, but thriving. You want to be living a good life and being able to do what you need to do. So then you can kind of work backwards on how much you want to be able to squat or to deadlift. And of course, learning how to do these things properly and safely is probably paramount. Yeah. And they are skills that you improve over time. But then once you're safe, I think it's good to be very consistent. I would say, at least a couple times a week for strength and working those ranges. And as you're putting that mobility piece together with the strength, you'll see that your range is feeling more comfortable, less delayed onset muscle soreness is what you should expect, which is what we enjoy, that good sensation of actual muscle soreness. Yeah. And you will actually have less joint, a lot of people are really worried about their joints, putting a lot of stress on their joints, but actually you're strengthening those joints through pairing that mobility piece. And I'll also pair that with, I often see when people talk about their nutrition as well, is that the lack of protein. So I would be aware of, when you're often the general rules are, if you're trying to maintain, it's 1 gram per kilogram. And if you're trying to increase, I think it should probably be more than that. But if you're trying to increase your muscle mass, you probably want 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Yeah. And I would say that would be a minimum. So pairing that together with your strength is how you actually increase that muscle density, because you do want to increase your strength and your muscle density over time, because there is this concept of, as we age, quote unquote, you're going to start losing all this muscle mass and bone density. But there are strategies that we talk about to avoid that. There's some supplementation, targeted supplementation to increase your vitamin D3 and your K2 to increase calcium absorption into those bones. And there's some other little hacks, if you will, that you don't have to do the inevitable that everybody else is doing if you can avoid it.
Yeah, for sure. I fully agree. And I like that. You talk about, as we get older, like the strength is underrated because falls are such a huge thing. And it's wild to me that grip strength is one of the highest, comorbidity factors when people have dying of cardiovascular disease and falls and all that stuff. It's pretty crazy.
It's very predictive of how weak that person is. That's why.
Yeah, it's nuts. So you kind of touched on a few nutrition pieces, and for me, this was the toughest chapter to write because the information out there is so split. It's so divided. There's nothing that's universal. Every solution is individualized to the person. So we kind of kept this as a broad stroke of the brush to kind of touch on the different sort of common dietary models. We talked about keto and paleo and vegetarian, vegan, pescatarian, even carnivore. And then we talked about intermittent fasting. So we scoped across the whole spectrum of the literature, and we found as many patterns as we could with these, and some of the cautions, I guess, with each meal plan that you go with. But the take home as we get into that is that, it's not that everyone reading the book is going to go keto and it's going to magically fix everything for you. There are people that are going to respond better to it than others, and not just like physiologically, also like lifestyle. It just might not be practical. And if it's not practical or sustainable, then there's a better solution. So we basically, and I did my nutrition cert with Precision this year. It was actually a really good course. I actually got more out of that than I thought I was going to. But the principle is that you want to start with where you're at and just kind of work stepwise towards that solution. And the way that those dietary models are useful is that can be your ideal. It doesn't have to be a hard in or out, but sort of working yourself towards that and just tracking how your body feels. So we walk through some of the ups and downs, the upsides, downsides, some of the potential cautions, some of the recommended supplementations along all those models, and what people can expect. But really, once you optimize nutrition, no matter what that model is, maybe you did find vegan is like your jam, and you're supplementing, you're watching your blood level, and everything is in line. So we talked about some of the long-term effects with that stuff. But once you nail that down, like everything else tends to fall in line. Like food should be at the baseline, whatever model you're following, it should be at least something you're taking into serious consideration. Because if you're just building a weak foundation for everything else if you're not kind of getting those nutrient dense foods into you to improve your energy, performance, sleep, and all that stuff around that. And Dan, I know you've talked a lot about nutrition, so maybe you can add some of your points and what you contributed to that chapter as well.
Yeah, I don't want to go too long on this one because I've gone through many journeys and self-experimentation. My thanks to my family for supporting my journeys, but I definitely have tried pretty much every diet that we described in there and saw how I felt, and then have come up with. And we used to run some nutritional makeover lectures as well, where we take people through kind of like, at that time, I don't even think the term paleo was being used all that much, but essentially we're trying to knock out all the junk and trying to eat more. Nutrient density was kind of the peak, or the most important thing that we looked at, but we tried to remove some foods that we knew caused inflammation or allergies, and people would work through that almost like an elimination style, and then start adding some foods in. So I think it's important for everybody to tinker with what they have, or with their food choices, and see how they do, and try different things. I think it's important. It's good. I agree. We tippy-toed around some topics because food does become almost dogmatic or religious, and people really, really dig their heels into what or they announce that they eat a certain way, and now they can't retreat from that because of what they decided. So, I mean,
they've got it tattooed on their forehead.
Yeah. so I think if you stick with nutrient density, and then a lot of the even a lot of the claims with a lot of the foods, there's this healthy user bias that usually people who are eating better, are hydrating more, or sleeping better, they're eating more supplements, so it kind of gets tricky to tease away what is actually
many confounding variables. It's definitely the most challenging fitness piece to study. And I feel bad for people in that domain, because it's just a crapshoot. Everything's going to come under fire when you release it. And people are so emotional with their food. So, but it's wild. Yeah.
And I'm big on, that I've tinkered with the CGM, so continuous glucose monitor. I think, I think at some point healthcare will be where everybody will be required to wear one, so that we can make good decisions. But essentially, if your blood sugar is going through the roof through certain dietary choices that you decide on, and you can make a very informed decision if you want to do that, but your inflammation is going to go up, and you're not going to feel great. Essentially, you're probably going to gain some weight, and your joints are going to hurt. So having a good idea of what, and now we know that there's certain foods that I can eat that will make my blood sugar go up, and there's ones that you'll eat and yours won't go up as high. So it's good to know, and knowing how to combine your foods. And then there's some hacking strategies that we discussed too, or that I often talk about, that I'm playing, some that I still play with today, that you can do your carbohydrates around your workout. I usually do the majority of my carbs at the end of the day. So that helps a little bit with your sleep, and adding a walk pre or post meal, or walking after your meal, you can see your blood sugar actually dropping, even if it's a higher carb meal. There's some supplementation that you can take to help as well, to keep your blood sugar in check. So I think those are some of the things that I would add. It's pretty easy to get these days. Before it was, I did the whole keto thing for like 3 years, pricking my finger daily with blood sugar, blood ketones. It was awful. And these continuous glucose monitors, you put them on once, and you got them on for, a week at a time. And you can just play that week, essentially looking at how you are affected by certain foods. And then you can really record some of that information and make a pretty informed choice as to what you should or shouldn't eat. And some things are definitely worth eating, even though the numbers don't look that pretty, I would say.
For sure. The nutrient density to flavor ratio has got to be accounted for. So I want to run through the mental resilience chapter as well. And this was something that, it's not necessarily in either of our disciplines, but we've taken very seriously. And I've briefly kind of painted a picture of my mental health history. I had I went through some serious depression in my teen years, and that's sort of been a bit of a weight weighing on me into my adulthood. So it's something that's always been on my radar. I'm not a therapist by any means, but I've studied the literature pretty detailed in terms of mental health and psychologies and sort of self care methods around mental health and improving cognition. And I think the most interesting observation I made when I studied this is that there's so much overlap between improving cognitive function and improving mood. A lot of the supplements, they're from it's the same actually for either for anxiety or for, improving cognition or preventing cognitive decline. So that kind of comes through in the chapter a little bit. So if you really want to improve mood and mental health, I think you should be doing something to stimulate yourself in terms of cognitive ability. So you're still your brain's still developing. You're not sort of slowing down the decline curve on that. So basically, we reviewed a lot of literature, big section on meditation. I was resistant to meditation for years, probably like a lot of people. And there's no shortage of positive outlets for meditation. There's really no downside. Even the act of trying to meditate is beneficial, even if you're not great at it. It improves focus, improves your mood, sleep. Everything that's been correlated to brain function has shown positive outlets from meditation. So we talked quite a bit about that. We talked about breath work, which is often kind of thought of as synonymously with meditation. But Dan outlined a lot of stuff kind of that was specific to breath and not just specific to, the conventional, let's slow down that heart rate, get in that parasympathetic state, but also kind of the other spectrums. Cognitive stimulation. We talked about a little bit of resonance therapy and supplementation, and sort of like trying to give a broad spectrum of all the stuff that we can use at our disposal to improve how our brain functions. Because that's one of those things too. Maybe one day we can grow a heart in a lab, but I can't imagine a scenario where you're growing a new brain in the lab, right? So I think the brain's that one thing you want to keep functioning at a high level naturally for as long as you possibly can. Because I think like technology is not really going to save us there, at least in the near future. Dan, maybe give a few of your kind of take home points, what you picked up from reading and writing that chapter.
Yeah, a lot of the meditation, a lot of my mentors over the years all used to meditate. So I used to struggle with this process. Some of the apps did help over the years. So I would encourage tinkering with an app if you've never gone there. Mm-hmm. It used to be quite woo-woo. So even just some basic, I talk about box breathing with anybody that's, I bring up the concept and I say, well, you can try box breathing. And then if you're in a stressful moment, you can try some techniques where you breathe in, you hold, you breathe out and hold, and that technique for like a 4 count, for example.
Yeah.
And meditation has always been still today. It's still a bit of a challenge to carve out that time, but I do always come back to it because I know that literature is so positive in that area. The breath work is super important, but it ties in again with this meditative piece.
Yeah.
I think connecting in nature as well is a big part of this. And kind of it all, you can do it all at the same time, almost like grounding on the grass, doing your mobility work while you're doing your breathing. Mm-hmm. It doesn't all have to be one or the other. You can kind of pack all this together and work. And you can see, just like Craig said, that the idea of looking at all the stuff that we put together in this book, all of it kind of works towards improving every bit of the other, so this cognitive
synergistic effect for sure.
Yeah, it's huge with what you're reading, with how you're moving, with what you're thinking, your thoughts and your plans. So from goal setting, these are all concepts that are great. I don't know what else to add to that section.
It's all good. We'll shift into biohacking. And this is, so as a disclaimer, we mentioned this in the book, like biohacking shouldn't be your first go-to. It's not like but it is really a Band-Aid solution. So if you don't have the other chapters kind of nailed first in terms of your nutrition, your mobility, your strength and your cardio and those pieces, you're not going to really get the same benefit from biohacking. It's really kind of an advanced thing. And in terms of using some technology, some, unconventional supplementation to sort of improve your function. The main things we touched on was temperature therapy. And what we know about the anti-aging process is that moderate stress causes positive adaptations. And the more of these positive adaptations that we have over our lifespan, the better we tend to function. So, and that's where temperature has kind of fallen into that sort of spectrum. So we talk about heat and cold. I've slightly changed my tune on cold since I wrote the book. I know there's enough that there's value in it. The literature is still a little bit limited because it is kind of new in terms of but there's enough out there to know there is some positive change. And it's a pretty quickly developing field. I still think there's people that are overdoing it. I think there's people that are running, doing like kilometer swims in the winter and down the river. And I don't know if that's doing you any good long-term. because it comes down to like the right dose. But I think like the standard kind of starting point is just hot, cold, in the shower sort of thing to get some benefit from cold therapy. And then sauna as well. We talked about like the impact of heat. It's similar. It's the opposite end of the spectrum, but stressing your body with extreme heat causes your body to adapt and get these positive adaptations. And you see that paired a lot of times with an infrared sauna. I know, Dan, you've got a sauna set up at home.
Well, I would say from an evolutionary, again, lens, if you're looking at 365 right now, most of us spend, 18 to 21 degrees is kind of where we're at almost every single day. And that doesn't sound very natural. For tens of thousands of years, we didn't do that. So now what we see in the biohacking world is that a lot of the hormesis is this stress that we talk about, whether it's exercise or cold or hot. We know too much cold, you're going to burn yourself. Too much heat, you're going to burn yourself. But seems to be these sweet spots where we gain, and there's some Finnish research that's significant on the benefits of sauna. So I try to sauna daily. My life, as you know, is quite busy. I have like an ideal morning routine that on paper is beautiful, but actually in the sauna is where I would do a lot of my meditating, a lot of my journaling, a lot of my goal setting for the day. And so that's kind of how you pair a lot of those concepts together, but doing them in a safe enough amount is what we realize is how we get this improvement in health span and longevity using biohacking. And even with supplementation, I would say all these kind of working in the same, but the dose does matter with all of these, and too much of these can be risky. But again, in the biohacking culture, some of the biggest error I would say is a lot of people go do all the fancy stuff and forget all the basics, and you can forget about all of that if you don't have all these foundational things that we described. Yeah,
I fully agree. So we touched on the light a little bit, and I've gotten into red light therapy, and that's like anecdotally, I've noticed some change there positively. So a bit of muscle stim. I dabble with that a little bit. Magnetism is a promising piece as well. You're starting to see that in some of the inflammatory disease treatment and stuff like that. You mentioned grounding and supplementation. So it's kind of like the chapter was basically a broad stroke of what is out there for biohacking and what you can take home to sort of make immediate change in it. Dan, I want to shift into your kind of current scope right now with what you're going on clinically and sort of in terms of your own messaging and in your business scope. What's going on for the rest of the year for you?
I'm actually going to my first live conference in 3 years next week. I'm excited to do that. I'm doing a little focus on some spinal stenosis. I'm doing a certification on that as well. But essentially I'm working in my family practice, busy. Since I'm a father of 5, I have 2 twin 20-month-olds right now. So they're keeping me quite busy, but seeing all these families over the years, because as I've grown my family, I used to work essentially with a lot of athletes initially, and now seeing my kids and seeing my over the years, seeing all their growth, and they're quite athletic. So I've learned a lot of different tips and tricks over the years with different things. I do a lot of ART that helps active release, which is a soft tissue technique that I use. I use some of this FRC as well. And then I incorporate a lot of the rehab concepts with the spinal alignment. One of the key pieces that I focus on is spinal hygiene. I mean, we can replace, like we talked about as well, with the brain, we can replace a lot of knees and hips, but we're not replacing a lot of spine currently. There's some techniques that are being used, but there's a lot of failed surgeries that are occurring as well. And I see the result of those, but getting somebody in a better alignment. Sometimes we can only do what we can do with some of the damage that's occurred, but, and then strengthening and mobilizing those joints, just like we work on some of the hips and shoulders, we want to work the spine. So I think a big emphasis on a daily self-care. And this concept of self-care is one that I talk about a lot. Like, you deserve to take care of you. You're going to be with you for a long time. So, and the spine is definitely an area that's neglected. So whether a lot of what I do is posture rehab, and I've moved to doing a lot of videos. So a lot of video content. I used to do a lot of workshops, but now, with the way the world is and the way life is for me too, it's a lot easier to send a quick 2-minute video on posture rehab, setups, standing workstation, and shoe selection. Me, I'm big on rewilding your feet, opening up your toes and strengthening your feet as well. So teaching people a lot of these principles, that this is what I talk about all day long, essentially with patients, is the stuff that we highlighted in the book. And that's kind of where I'm headed. Right now I'm reading Life Force, which is Tony Robbins, Peter Diamandis book on regenerative medicine. So there actually it is realistic that all these organs are being
engineered.
They are definitely being created right now.
Yeah.
And it's just scaling that. And we're probably a ways away, but it's the stuff that's happening is really, really exciting for us in the future. But
Absolutely.
Preserving where you are right now seems to be at least a lot of these, the discussion with these people that are really futurists and is keeping yourself as healthy as you can for now, even though some of this stuff is in the pipeline and it's coming.
Yeah.
That's the majority right now.
Cool. I love it. So the book is available now on electronic copy. You can download it from the Healthspan Academy website or our social media. We're working on the hard copy. We should have that out later this year. We're discussing a minor title change before we get that going, but that should be good to go. We're excited to get that out to you guys because it's, like I said, it's been about, I guess, a 2-year process now. We're excited to get that out to you guys and kind of give you your take home guidebook to kind of keep your health habits in check for as long as you can. What's the best place for people to follow your content, Dan?
guelphnaturalhealth.ca. You can sign up for my newsletter. All my videos are on there. Because of the busyness of my life as well, I'm not a big fan of social media, so you won't see me there for a little bit, probably until my twins are in grade school, likely. Yeah. At this pace. I'm pretty family focused right now, so all my time, if I'm not working or doing some writing, I'm definitely hanging out, mucking around, playing with the kids. So cool. guelphnaturalhealth.ca.
Awesome. We'll link to that in the show notes for you. Well, thanks for the time, Dan. It was great catching up.
Thanks, Craig. That was awesome.
Cheers, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in this episode of Healthspan Academy, and we'll see you next time.